Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're having a fantastic day. We got another banger video for you in Razzlevarg himself. Now, this one has a little bit more influence by me, but I cannot say without 100% giving due diligence and credit. This was also influenced by a community member of mine. His name is Short on Skills. Salutes to you, and thank you for helping me work on this composition. To give you guys context, we had a composition for the original Razzle Dazzle build, which included 2-turn duration unkillable champions, and I personally myself on my main account have Helicath, but I also had Warcaster. I didn't have another 2-turn duration count champion, so we had to do a tune that involved or revolved around being able to use Warcaster, which had a little bit of intricacies behind it. But I also had a concern with Helicath. Helicath is viable in other areas like Iron Twins Fortress, which I've been trying to develop teams for myself, utilizing both of them. Now, by original build standards, one speed would not complement the other in terms of being usable in other areas of the game. I inquired and requested that there was a designed composition that had the speeds for Iron Twin Fortress in mind to be usable for the clan boss side of things. So one size fits all was what I was asking for. And if you guys have also experienced a similar case with myself, where you have one really good champion that's viable in other areas of the game, but you only have one copy of them, well, how do you spread yourself thin, or how do you spread yourself across doing multiple sets of content with just one version of that champion? So this was my answer. I hope you guys are looking forward to it. Let's get into it. Alright, so how we're going to do this is we're going to show you guys the rotation as well as position strategy for this composition, and then we're going to segue to the actual run itself, followed by a gear to give you guys a little bit more insight to how the builds of each of the champions are designed. To give you context, this composition is a variation of the Razzle Dazzle composition, but its speeds are slightly different to allow us to get value in other areas of the game utilizing characters like Helicat, for example. In terms of like core components for this composition, Razzle is the one who is giving us that increased speed as well as increased accuracy to give us that extra oomph behind our stats for speed and accuracy. Helicath and Warcaster themselves are block damage champions who kind of make us immune to damage through most of these 50 rounds that we're going to go through. Doom Priest herself is going to be our cleanser and pseudo buffer, believe it or not, and of course our main DPS outlet is going to be Mishinaki himself. Now, in terms of positioning, Razzle has to be in the speed lead because he provides that increased aura. If you have Phantom Touch or Cruelty on them, I've seen positive experiences from that. But followed by that, in the first slot, we have Mishinaki, followed by Doom Priest. And the reason why this is like this, in terms of all the champions that we have that are going to potentially take this stun, we want to make sure that, if possible, try to avoid Razzle, Helicath, or Warcaster taking the stun. Mishinaki as a DPS outlet doesn't change anything if he so happens to lose a turn during any type of stun effects, right? In addition to that, Doom Priest being able to take the stun, she never loses a turn because she immediately cleanses at the top of her turn. So those two being some ideal stun outlets are great for our composition. Now, with that being said, Helicath being a Spirit Affinity does make him more likely to take the stun from our magic counterpart of affinity friendliness throughout this composition, but there is a specific rotation that keeps that in mind, and we'll showcase that in our calculator links down below. But that is the positional strategy I have for my team. In terms of rotation, I'm going to show you for non-magic, so Void, Force, Spirit. This works across all of those, and this also works across Brutal, Nightmare, and Ultra Nightmare. Starting with Razzle, of course, there's no delays in terms of any abilities. He immediately prioritizes his A3 ability, which gives you the speed and the increased accuracy, followed by the Leech, and then ultimately when those are down, you follow up with the A1. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. He is going at a 258 speed. Now, That is important to note because the original composition for the Razzle Dazzle, he was around roughly like a 232 speedish range. The value or the difference between the two here is that not only is he going faster, but this equates to him doing more damage. And the reason why is that he scales his abilities based off of attack and speed. And believe it or not, for the A2 and the A3, he actually leans more on the speed for the multiplier of things. There's more nuance behind that, and I'm not going to go into detail there, but truthfully, A2, A3, they kind of sync up more value the higher your speed is. A1, the more attack you have. I believe that's how the multipliers work. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's how that works. Mishinaki, compared to the counterpart, I think the maximum speed for the original Razzle Dazzle comp was 215. This composition, not really too much margin of changes, roughly stays straight at 220. Razzle, before I go too much further, he can go up to as far as 263. Anything above that will desync the comp. So you have a little bit of playroom in terms of how fast you can take Razzle. Of course, the higher you want to go, the better. I was okay with him sticking to 258 for right now, considering my gear and how much I can get out of him from a damage standpoint. Mishinaki, of course, being just our damage dealer, we just want to make sure that he gets that Hex off so he can ally attack with the rest of our team at a 50% chance rate, considering his passive. So keeping that uptime on the Hex is very, very important. And then, of course, bringing in that decreased defense, which is more important for this composition. And he does bring decreased attack, which is less important for this particular composition because we're unkillable. Followed up with his ability to do HP burn. That's your priority right there. Doom Priest, in counterpart to the original Razzle Dazzle comp, was 170, I believe, was the max you can get. For this one, I believe 187 is pretty much the sweet spot. I tried to do some variations from it, but it seemed to like maybe mess up on some of the lower difficulty, so I kept it at a healthy 187, not trying to change the composition too much to give you that breadth of room. Now, this is the key part right here. Helicaf, and the reason why my variation is so unique and distinct is that he's going at 257 speed. 257, if you are familiar with Iron Twins, is the speed that he would need to go with a triple PK comp. So 3 painkillers, 1 Helicath, and a DPS, which traditionally is probably like a Geomancer who you can get reflect damage off for free, right? That composition requires him to go at 256 or 257. This composition will allow for 256 or 257 so that you have that bit of playroom. If 257 is a little bit higher and you're learning that you're losing a little bit of stats, which I did ultimately do for the purpose of this comp, my gear wouldn't allow me to alleviate... I would have to alleviate myself of too much damage from Heli to complement the amount of speed I did. So I took that negative, but overall, the amount of output I got in other areas from this composition were a lot healthy. Look at Razzle, for example. Warcaster also is pretty straightforward. He opens up A3 as his priority stat, and then, of course, I turned off the A2 because... block buffs is not a buff that we need for clan boss, so he pretty much just focuses on putting the A1 out, while whenever his turn comes for the block damage, it syncs up well. Now, how this composition works is that, as long as he's not Magic Affinity, we have a specific tune for that, but how this composition works, and we're going to get right into it, is they're going to offset each other. So Helicath will do is on every other turn, and then the other turns, every other turn inverted from that, Warcaster should balance that out. So as this syncs up, it syncs up roughly around turn 3, which is when the stun effect happens. You should see it sync up to a point where at the end of every turn, you're going to see Warcaster, and at the beginning of every turn, you're going to see Doom Priest. So Doom Priest is cleansing anything that goes off, and then, of course, Helicath either on his turns where he's doing the block, it's a 2-turn duration, so anybody that goes a little bit after them, they still have that 1 turn available to them in terms of the debuff being available. You notice how like the stun targeting is on Mishinaki because we have that steadfast mastery, which we'll show you guys later on in terms of who has what, but we want to ideally avoid the unkillables or the block damage, basically the core of the team, like I said earlier, to take that damage. As you can see, we're now going to be roughly entering into that sync period where you're going to start seeing that shortly after. I believe by turn 5, everything is kicking in line where it needs to be at. But at this point, if everything is going well, you should have your Hex, the decreased defense, as well as the weekend, I forgot to mention, from Helicath from his A1 being available. At this point, it's pretty much going to full clear and full send. This is the worst affinity for the damage dealers we have in our team composition, but I want you guys to see it even in the roughest scenario about the damage potential you can get and where we can improve from there. I'm going to disappear. I want you guys to enjoy this, and we'll see you after this run is over. Alrighty, I gotta be honest with you guys, man. It's a little unfortunate, but we actually came really close to that 1 key territory. As always, I wanted to show you guys this particular run because it does show you the reality of having to face against affinity, negative-based clan boss issues and whatnot that you can occur when you're using 2 magic-oriented affinity-type champions, right? Razzle being a heavy damage outlet himself, on top of Mishinaki being also blue affinity, can lead to, like, very small complications. I don't know if you guys saw it throughout the fight, but there were a couple of opportunities where Mishinaki could have landed a Hex or his decreased defense that did not succeed, ultimately lowering the overall output of the team's damage output, not only from themselves from decreased defense, but Mishinaki not having opportunities to hit those ally attacks. And even when he did, there were some chances where he was hitting that weak effect. But nevertheless, even with that, it's still very close. Now, I'm going to show you guys the gear here so you guys can have an idea of what I'm working with, but in particular, I want to show you guys some areas where you can see some improvements from my composition, and which will, you know, those little small incremental changes will ultimately add up to a much more efficient run, even in the light of a negative affinity style fight. I'm also going to show you guys a screenshot of me doing it on Void, as well as maybe potentially some other affinities, and you'll see where the potential of damage output, even at my level of my account, and for all, you know, conversations and sakes and purposes here, I consider my account to be something around the lines of a mid-game transitioning to late game, because I just recently unlocked Lydia, and Mithril is a couple days away from me. So I'm actually getting more and more towards that late game aspect type of style of account progression, but even then there's a lot of room for improvement, and that's what you're always constantly looking at. It's like, where can I squeeze out just a little bit more damage to give me that guaranteed 1 key? As it currently stands with those specific type of champions, I have 1 keyed every type of affinity except for Force. It's a little bit more closer towards that 69 range to 67 range, but there is some potential depending on whether or not the RNG of weak hits and failure to land certain debuffs occur. So, with that being said, let me show you the kit. I'm running Razzlevarg in a Instinct / Speed set. So, the Ignore defense is not too much as valuable in terms of Clan Boss, because Clan Boss is a low defense-based boss. However, it still does. You still get a little bit of extra damage. It's very microscopic comparatively to maybe using some other type of sets or whatever. But my value is in the speed itself, as well as the substats that I got from it. So to show you his kit overall, specifically for Demon Lord, we got roughly north of 5k attack with 258 speed. Remember, I'm going to reiterate that again. It's a specific speed requirement that we had to hit for it. This can scale up. I can glyph him a couple more points up as long as it stays within no higher than 63. Anywhere between 258 to 263, no problems whatsoever. 100% crit rate. With 185 crit damage. I've been looking more and more into amplifying my gear so that I can go north of 200, you know, switching out some crit rate gloves for some crit damage gloves instead. That's something I've been looking to tinker in, so that's going to be the next step of my iteration for my build. Of course, my accuracy is 167 with artifacts, but then when you scale up the affinity bonuses, which that is complete for me on my side, I have no area bonuses from Clan Boss, so it's going to be 247 is what I'm hitting at, and that's before his buff kicks in, so you can definitely see that he's going to have some efficiency with landing his debuffs. I did go down the route of crit damage to see if maybe I could get a little bit more, and I did tinker with Ignore defense a little bit there too as well, before subsequently changing from Demon Lord altogether in terms of area bonuses. But to give you context, areas that I could see improvement in, for one, there are a couple pieces like his helmet, maybe even the weapon that I feel like could use better stats, kind of like how my shield is in terms of like getting a decent amount of accuracy, decent amount of speed, and of course crit rate, crit damage. Looking more so for those crit rate, crit damage numbers, because I have crit damage gloves that do have crit rate on them, but they're not necessarily enough to guarantee that 100% crit rate within the speeds I'm looking for. So that's somewhere I'm going to be looking to tune up a little bit more, but as you obviously saw, I have areas where my speed isn't glyphed, so I could definitely have like a lot of overhead that I can catch up on, or maybe, you know, bring down the speeds a little bit in favor of better stats. But you get the idea. In terms of skills and blessings and whatnot, he's fully booked. I did go Phantom Touch with him prior to me unlocking Cruelty on, I believe it was my Warcaster, I was running Cruelty on him, and I saw still positive results. So either one of those stats work. I do know that you can technically go into Intimidating Presence with him. If you have the blessings for it, then by all means you can, but just know that your speeds are going to vary even more on top of that. So to avoid that, I was like, I just want the damage from him, and I'm looking for Phantom Touch at that point. In terms of masteries, pretty much your standard go-to down the tree of War Master. But I did, and this is another caveat here, I did get Stat Fast Mastery on him. And because the way that the clan boss stun targeting goes, it makes sure that it looks at this particular mastery as if it's another buff. So buffs play a mine into, the targeting of it. He looks to see who he can one-shot. Affinity, weak type champions are also favorable. Who he can kill or who he can get the most damage out of. So having this kind of give him that indicator, like, oh, he's kind of got like another buff on him, so he doesn't look at him very often, is ideal because it allows us to maybe get those first initial stuns, when you're syncing up your comp, that little sync period. You don't want it to go on to specific champions. So that little caveat in mind is something that's kind of important. And of course, another thing we have to keep in mind is Lore Steel, something that you can get some extra bonuses in terms of stats. Now, when you're doing it with speed, you're no longer looking at a solid 258. It could be 258 point and some change. So basically, those fractional differences are important to keep in mind because they are the make it or break it sometimes between compositions working and compositions just not working at all. Now, with that being said, moving on to our next champion, I'm going to go to Mishinaki here. Mishinaki, actually, not too bad himself. I was able to get him into some pretty decent crit damage. I would like to be able to hit north of 5k defense moving forward. That's going to be something I'm going to be aspiring to moving on. One thing I'll give you guys an idea of is that my Great Hall isn't as developed as it could be. So there's a lot of overhead, not only from defense percent increases, crit damage increases. There's a lot of room for growth there, right? So expect this to grow over time as my account develops and generates more medals for Great Hall and the affinity bonuses as well. But maintaining that speed is the most important part of this build, and then placating damage with him, which is 4k or more. Ideally was what I was looking for, and then of course 200 plus was what I was aiming for. I was happily surprised to hit 230, and then of course 433 with the 1 at the end. So 4,331. The accuracy side of things, I did hit anywhere between 150 or higher. It ended up leaning me towards the 200 range, and that just kind of came naturally. It wasn't something I was going out of my way to find. But that was the great thing about this kit with Razzle enabling both speeds as well as increased accuracy. Just means that I can neglect this stat and I still get what I'm looking for. But gear as it may be, I was able to get it. I was running a speed set as well as a crit damage set to get my damage out of. So seeing that I have 2 out of 3 set bonuses right now, and one of those are not even a 4-piece set, means I have room for growth on my build. But as you can see, we'll slowly get ourselves further as we get better chances and better look at better pieces. No blessing on him, although I will argue that considering how his passive works, and he's one of the ones who are the most active in this composition, I lean towards a developed Brimstone. So that we can have some high uptime on that. He's more likely to hit it and land it, considering where his accuracy is at. So I thought that like those type of when it comes to that blessing, the more opportunities you get to land it at lower levels gives you the opportunity to maybe hit it more often. So it's more so a method against chances. So it's on per hit. Every hit you get, when you look at the accuracy, as long as you hit the accuracy requirements to supersede the resistance of the clan boss, which is 250, then you're able to potentially land that, and that chance is based off of whatever the star level is, right? So having someone who can have more chances in that ally attack would be ideal. So that's somewhere I would add a little bit more extra value to Mishinaki's output, or just my debuff bar in general, right? Blessings wise, this is a little bit different. I don't care if he's actually our stun target or not. So I decided for him, I wanted to go down the accuracy route initially for the support tree. You could technically do defense too if you care for it. Defense will automatically translate to more output, but some of these stats like receive from AoEs, because we're block damage and we don't have to worry about the damage input we take, because a little bit less value. So I went down the line of getting Lore Steel, Master Sniper, Master Hexer, and Sniper to maybe give me a little bit more value on my debuff side of things so that we can guarantee that uptime a little bit better. And of course, falling down the attack tree, you go down your traditional route of going towards War Master. Most of his stuff is a single hit on hit, you know, so like War Master's a little bit better compared to Giant Slayer where he's not a multi-hitter. Moving forward, Helikath himself, we did end up going down 2 Cruels, but I think that's just based on the fact that we had decent stats. I had a couple triple rolls and some value there. And then, of course, a broken set in between, so room for improvement yet again. But looking at his kit, north of 4K, 100% crit rate, we did have to sacrifice his gloves for crit damage in favor of one that could provide a little bit more substance in the speed side of things. I think with maybe potentially more glyphing, and I'll work on that as we get more glyphs, or better glyphs for that matter, we may be able to change up some of the build to give us a little bit more damage output that way. But just to give you guys a little room for improvement area in terms of where this build is at, 141, not too bad. 257 speed is the key here. 256 or 257 is where you want to sit him at. And then, of course, 153 accuracy. Add that increased accuracy on board, then you'll be able to get a little bit more. Now, keep in mind, affinity-wise, still got room for improvement, right? So I got 10 more coming on the way. And then, of course, you know, affinity bonuses for defense are pretty much non-existent. And then crit damage non-existent. So a lot of overhead that's going to be joining up as we progress our account a little bit more. No blessings here. I have difficulty finding out another way to do it, but Brimstone was one of the other ones. I was thinking that he would do it because he counterattacks at the end of every single turn that the boss does damage towards, which he does damage across all 3. So he's always going to counterattack, right? As long as block damage is up, which it is. So Brimstone was one I was thinking of, but if we go with Mishinaki getting it, then maybe less valuable for him. He doesn't really benefit from Phantom Touch because he's a defensive-based champion, so I thought maybe Cruelty would be a little bit better there. It'd be really cool to see if they can provide a Phantom Touch-like blessing to a defensive-style champion, or maybe even an HP-based champion if that becomes an option. I did think about maybe giving him Intimidating Presence, but like I said, that would affect the speed tunes a little bit, so you have to keep that in mind when you're rolling with a composition that has a speed lead champion, right? So I strayed away from that if I were to choose, but to be honest with you, it would probably be like Cruelty or something around those lines, you know, as one of my go-to staples. Maybe we change Warcaster to use Phantom Touch since he benefits from it, right? Speaking of Warcaster, we did a broken set with one Immortal set. The Immortal set isn't really valuable in terms of anything. It's more so just for the stats over sets. Once I develop better gear for my offensive champions, maybe we will develop a little bit more of a better tune for him. But the idea is 247 speed, and then 100% crit rate, and then, of course, a balance between attack, which is his primary stat, and then crit damage, right? So this is a little bit more on the weaker side. Definitely room for improvement. I agree. Since he's not placing any debuffs, particularly, his accuracy is completely negligible, so we don't have to worry about that. It's all about just making sure he hits that speed and then wherever damage we could. I did run in previous iterations double toxic sets with him and Doom Priest, and it was good. But then it got to a point where the debuff bar was a little overstimulated, and there was some opportunity where Mishinaki's decreased defense or Hex didn't get applied because of the debuff bar being too full. So ultimately, I just went to, let's just get as much damage we can out of him out of a decent build, and then from there, try to see him thrive in a specific speed. Now, with that being said, the lowest speed of them all was my Doom Priest, and we definitely was like, you know what, since she's lower, we can get a much more aggressive build out of her using Toxic so that we can keep a healthy debuff bar, and we ultimately were able to achieve that for the most part, you know, 100% crit rate, within 187 speed, which is the key there for her. I believe you have maybe 1 or 2 points of speed variances that you can go in this build, but I would be very careful because some of these are pretty tight fit, so if you want to stay close to it, 187 was the number for me. Then after that, it was pretty much just stacking damage. 100% crit rate, you know, as much crit damage and enough attack that I could fit inside this build. Because the abilities she used doesn't use any type of accuracy and set bonuses aren't dependent on accuracy themselves, we decided to just neglect that altogether and just go for raw damage inside that set. And that's what ultimately we had. Skills, fully booked. I mean, you kind of get it. Her passive gives the heal, which isn't relevant for this comp, but does remove that debuff. So if we ever get decreased speed from Spirit Affinity, she's a girl. If you ever get that decreased accuracy or decrease attack, which will affect champions like Razzlevarg and Warcaster, that's our girl. She cleanses them off at the top of every turn. And then, of course, you're going down the tree of being able to get some value out of deterrence whenever someone gets stunned. So, like, that's a good value where she can get, like, maybe an extra hit off before she starts her turn. And then, of course, getting as much War Master procs as we can is ideally what we went for. Altogether, this composition was a very, very fun build to bring to fruition. It opens the door to using my Helicaf in the Iron Twins composition that uses triple PK. So I was looking at that and I was like, you know what? This is a great opportunity to be able to do two things with one champion. And I think that's what makes this particular comp stand out. Now, I kind of talked about some things that you can do to kind of bring more of an output from this this composition, but looking at how our Mishinaki was negative affinity for force affinity was a little unfortunate, but you could technically replace him with anybody in that slot at 220 speed who is positive affinity and just let them become monsters and do their damage, and it'll result you in the exact same optimal amount of DPS that you're looking for in that affinity, and you will probably one key. So if you're worried about damage output for just specifically force, by all means you can do it, but this affinity, this composition works across 3 different difficulties and all different affinities. I am going to show you guys the rotation for specifically magic, since it has to do with Helicaf taking the stun and being able to play around that. I'll show you guys that here in just a moment. But the main thing is that you can do it across all affinities, and they're pretty much one key every single affinity for the most part. So, you know, if you do 3 affinity key or 3 keys across Brutal, Nightmare, and Ultra Nightmare, that extra key in the event that force is occurring and across any of those, you can use that 4th key that you get during your, you know, every 6 hours to use it on that one to kind of fill the gap, and it'll do you just fine. Now, with that being said, one little last caveat, and we'll show you guys the magic rotation here. I have a pre-built section. This is they're both fully auto, just so you're aware. The same thing is pretty much how you would look at it. It's the same speeds. You have your A3, A2 priority set up for Razzlevarg. Of course, he's always going to try to prioritize this. No additional openers to kind of offset or anything like that. Same thing with him. He could do his A3 into A2. I didn't have it preset in here, but that's pretty much how he rolls it. Same thing with Doom Priest. Just let her go. She always does her A2 if it's up. For Helicath, we open up with the A2. And then we have A2 prioritized. Now, this works particularly because the fact that we have his A2 partially booked. So that's something to keep in mind when it comes to rotations. The same applies to the non-magic affinity. This works particularly in mind if you can have him booked at 4-turn cooldown on the A2 and 4-turn cooldown on the A3. So prioritize the A1 with the opener being the A1, and then of course the A2, sorry, the A2, excuse me, and the A3 shortly afterwards. And then, of course, with Warcaster, pretty much the exact same thing. He opens up with his A3, and then it'll sync up. The way that it works for Magic Affinity is that Helicath does his ability to a point where on the after the 3rd stun, when you're going into turn 4, that first turn that Helicath gets, he would typically do his A3, but because he's stunned, it gets delayed. So we play with that delay in mind to a point where it syncs up that he does it on his 2nd turn, ultimately causing the entire composition to be in sync, where that turn he's doing unkillable at the end of his 2nd turn, and then of course Warcaster offsets him, and then they pretty much just balance off each other at that point. That's pretty much how the rotation works for Magic Affinity. All the other ones will just revert to the @1. I'll have the calculators in the description or in the comments below, so you can use them and refer to them, maybe do some tinkering, some change outs yourself to see if they work for you. That's pretty much it. If you guys like this this composition, let me know. If you didn't like it, tell me why. What concerns do you have about this composition? I think that there's a lot of growth that can be brought into it, even from my own account, so I'm looking forward to seeing it grow as I develop my account more over time. Better gear, better Great Hall situation, and just see this thing really thrive. Razzle is just constantly giving us more and more options to work with, and this isn't the only comp he works in. I mean, you saw on my previous video with a traditional style composition where he was running at a 232 speed, so you could definitely see a lot of value in Razzlevarg, and he's great in other areas of the game too. You know, Hydra, to name a few. Dungeons, I've actually done some fun dungeon runs at stage 15 IT. I've done hard mode, where he was actually the one that was giving my team that extra speed to kind of go a little bit more faster, in variance to someone like my Arbiter, for example. You know, a lot of playability with him, and it's super, super fun. He's a monster, and he's constantly giving. And to be honest with you, the sky's the limit. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe if you guys have any feedback or anything you want to give us. We definitely appreciate you guys taking the time to watch this video. And with all that being said, I hope you have a great day. And always, always remember, stay ascended.
Got the